Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. This webinar is Solar Advocacy Training, and we're presenting this webinar from Solar United Neighbors of West Virginia, as well as our coalition, West Virginians for Energy Freedom. So thanks for taking the time to participate. My name is Autumn Long. I am the West Virginia Program Director for Solar United Neighbors. I also supervise several other state programs in the Midwest and Central Appalachia. And I'm here to co-present this webinar along with our Vice President of Policy and Advocacy, Glen Brand. Glen's joining us from Washington, D.C., and I'm here in lovely, wild, and wonderful West Virginia. So we're going to take you through some basic general best practices and protocol to be a successful citizen advocate for solar. And then we're also going to dive into some specifics about our policy campaign that we're running here in West Virginia through West Virginians for Energy Freedom, Solar United Neighbors, and our coalition of partners. So citizen participation is absolutely critical to successful policy development. So thank you for your interest in this topic. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We will have time for some questions at the end of the webinar. So if questions arise at any point, please type them into the Q&A panel. You can see that at the bottom of the webinar screen. There's a button that says Q&A, and you can type questions there. There's also a chat option, and so I will monitor those throughout the webinar, and we'll get to those at the end. So I will let Glenn take it away for now, and he'll get us started with some general concepts about lobbying and advocacy.
Yeah, and I also just want to repeat what Autumn said, and want to thank everybody for taking the time to do this and for showing interest and commitment to be an effective citizen solar advocate in West Virginia. The stuff I want to talk about today is not, brain surgery. There's a lot of common sense here, but there's also a lot of sort of inside tips. There's some research to back up some of this advice, but there's a lot of practical advice that I want to go through. I'm not going to assume that people have done a lot of lobbying or much lobbying, and so bear with me if you have some experience, but I want to make sure, excuse me, that we're inclusive as possible. The first thing I want to say, excuse me, sorry about that. The first thing I want to say is that it's really important that our legislators hear from a variety of perspectives. When it comes to solar, our friends in the industry, and solar installers and environmental groups, they do a good job doing, bringing their perspective. But it's really important that solar owners and prospective solar owners bring their unique perspective to the table. And that's really an important part of what we do. And thank you for doing that. Excuse me. I first want to just talk about what lobbying is. Lobbying has, for lots of good reasons, a negative connotation. And I want to just define it as simply as getting what you want by advocating to the people with the power to give it to you. I think that's a nice neutral definition. We want to distinguish between the kind of lobbying that's done by lawyers and suits and private interests and utilities, et cetera, from the kinds of lobbying we're talking about, which is grassroots lobbying, citizen lobbying. A lot of people are skeptical that grassroots lobbying works, and I can assure you that it does. Now, that doesn't mean it always works, and clearly sometimes it's more impactful than other times. That's why it's really important that we become effective advocates. Number one, our time is precious, right? We're volunteers overwhelmingly, and so we want to make sure that we're using our time efficiently. But number two is the private interest lobbying. They're pretty effective, and that's why we've got to up our game and employ people power. So I want to go to the next slide, which is really the basis of the presentation. This illustrates sort of the levels of citizen lobbying tactics that are common. And it's structured in a way, as you probably can tell, from the sort of easiest and least time-consuming action as you go up the pyramid that takes more time and more careful planning. It also, generally speaking, this pyramid reflects the level of impact. So while it's super important to, respond to our action alerts, saying send a message to your representative and tell them to vote yes or no, that's really not enough to win. I would say it's always important to do that. It's easy to do. It's not unimportant. But if that's all we do, we're unlikely to win in most cases. And so I sort of want to encourage everyone to take this slide at heart and to consider doing 2 or more of these more upper echelon parts of the pyramid. And we're going to go through each one and talk about some practical tips. First of all, if you're contacting your state representatives, you really should find out a little about their background and particularly their position on the issues at hand, in this case, solar and clean energy. And you don't have to do this research yourself. You can ask us. We'd be glad to tell you when there is a voting record. There are other organizations that do a good job of tracking this, but we'd be glad to help you. I think it's super important and common sense to prepare what you want to say. And I think the one thread, you'll hear me say it a few times, the most important thing you can do as a citizen advocate is to tell your particular story about how the issue, the bill, solves a problem in your community, how it impacts your business, your family. That makes a greater impact than presenting the facts. The facts are important, but the facts, anybody can submit talking points and facts. And what really drives home the message and gets the attention and makes you stand out when you talk to state representatives is telling a compelling story, a real story about the impact of the particular issue. I think just some common sense stuff here. When you're emailing or calling your representatives, you want to, or speaking with them in person, you want to address them by their proper title. In some places they're delegates, some places they're representatives or senators. It's really important to identify yourself by not only your name, of course, but where you're from. They need to know that you're a constituent. That's really important. And if it's relevant to the issue, you might want to say your profession and organizational affiliations. Say you're a business owner and you think that the solar bill in question is good for businesses in West Virginia. You want to talk about your experience as a business person, for example. You might want to talk about your organizational affiliation if it's relevant. You might want to say you're a member or supporter of Solar United Neighbors of West Virginia, so that they get a sense of where you're coming from. Another thing to do is to take this time just to identify the bill that you want to talk about by the bill title and number. Very often, if you look at it from their perspective, they're hearing about 100 different bills and they can't keep track of them all. So you want to make sure you get right to it. So they'll write that down and that'll help focus the conversation. When you're emailing and all these rules for any kind of communication, but you want to briefly state how you want them to vote. I mean, that's the purpose of the interaction, right? You want to get right to the point. Say, I'm hoping you'll consider supporting such and such bill because. And then you would explain again how the bill would affect you and your personal life and your community. Sometimes the representative will say, let me stop you there. I'm not with you. And so it's important to be prepared for that. And you want to express disappointment, not anger. You can say, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. And then you want to ask them, what will it take? What kind of information do you need to reconsider your position? And that opens up a sort of a conversation, right? And then if they'll say, well, I really want to know what the financial impact or the business economic impact of this bill will be. And then you say, well, I don't have that at my hand, but I'm going to get back to you with that. And when you follow up the next day, you can supply that information, and you could get that information from us. We'll be glad to help you find it. I think generally you want to be what I would call politely assertive. You want to use a professional tone. You might feel, of course, anger about a particular interaction, but you try not to express it. Certainly not threaten people, by saying we'll vote you out. That kind of thing doesn't produce a good relationship. And that's one of the goals here. Is this is not just a one-off interaction. You really are part of what you're doing here is to build an ongoing and productive relationship with your representative. Now, meeting in person with your representative is usually the most impactful way to lobby. Making a phone call is great if you think about that pyramid that we had before. Sending a personal email rather than a canned email is good. But by far the most impactful thing you can do is meeting with your representative in person. There's lots of ways to do that. There are lobby days like the one coming up that we'll be talking about a little later. That's a fun way to do it with other people. The whole thing is just more fun. You get more support that way. But you can also just request a meeting, usually, at least a week ahead of time. Just call up their legislative office. We can help you do this if you're not sure where to go to get the information. And you ask them, depending on the time of the session, whether we can meet in district that is nearby locally or need to travel to the Capitol. If your legislature schedule is not open, don't just accept a no. Say, well, then I'd like to meet with a staffer to talk about the issue. Any interaction with the office is important. And the reason why that is because so few people do this. And that's why you can have a disproportionate impact when you have an in-person meeting with your legislator. When you're preparing for a meeting with your representatives, you want to take a look at all the stuff I just said before about calling or emailing, addressing them by their name and identifying the bill and all of that. It's a good idea to have a one-page outline of talking points, and I would really recommend not more than a page. You don't want to be reading something. You want to have a conversation. So just stuff to remind you of the number and the facts of what we're talking about. One mistake that a lot of people make, that I used to make, is I would bring a lot of written material to leave with the legislators. Generally speaking, they don't read it. They won't read it. But if you bring something and you think it's really important, it should fit on one page, front back. Much more likely for them to look at that material. Another thing that I used to make this mistake, and I still do sometimes, and I think a lot of us who are the outgoing type, we have this opportunity to meet with a legislator and we talk a lot. And that's good, that's important. You don't have that many times that you can talk to your legislators. But you want to be really conscious of allowing them lots of opportunities for them to speak. And so you can learn about where they're coming from, what their concerns are, what their fears are about the bill. So sometimes that means stopping and having a couple of those awkward moments of silence and allow them to respond. I think if you're going alone, it sometimes can be distracting to take brief notes. I think it's always a good idea to remind yourself, if you're going with somebody, which we always recommend, maybe divide up the duties of the note taker and the main speaker, or take turns. Sometimes they'll ask you questions. And if you don't know the answer to a question, just say, I don't know, but I'll be glad to help find that answer and get it to you. And talk to us, we'll be glad to help you find the answer. You want to close those meetings by thanking them for the meeting, and then tell them you're going to send up a follow email. And no matter if they're expecting information from you or not, a follow-up email is a good idea. Again, if your representative disagrees with you directly, and they might say, look, I'm not with you on this. I've already committed to oppose the bill. I told my leadership. just calmly express your disappointment. Say, I'm really sorry to hear that. Can I get you what kind of information would be needed for them to even reconsider? And that gets the conversation going. They're going to respond to that. Well, saying, well, if you can really demonstrate that this is going to X, Y, Z, then I'd be interested. And then you say, great, I'll see what I can get you, and then offer to follow up with that email. And again, as I've said several times, we'd be glad to help you get that information. I think a good practice after the meeting is immediately look at your notes and make sure you understand what you've written. And if you have two people and you're comparing notes, to make sure that they all, they agree with each other. I think either the same day or no later than the next day, it's good practice to send a very brief email thanking them for the meeting, include any of the requested information if there was. And then an important part of this is to repeat the ask. Just simply say, and again, as we discussed, I hope you will consider supporting this such and such bill. If they say they're going to support, again, thank them for their support. That's important. They get a lot of complaints. They appreciate positive words, and when they deserve it, it's great to give it. You can also ask supporters to do more. You can ask them to encourage their colleagues to follow suit or co-sponsor the bill. And so sometimes they'll say, oh, look, I'll support it, but I'm not going to co-sponsor, or sometimes they'll do that. They'll co-sponsor, or sometimes they'll even lobby their own colleagues. Another thing you could do is to write a letter to the editor. Now, this is a really neglected lobbying technique. And I bring it up because I don't think a lot of people appreciate how important it is to a legislator to see their name in the newspaper. And that's the key to a letter to the editor, an LTE, is everyone wants to be in a letter to the editor, the largest paper in the state. But to tell you the truth, that's harder to get in. But it's a lot easier if it's a local paper in the district of the legislator. So those weeklies are really, that publish letters to the editor, those are ideal places. They are monitored by staff and the legislator all the time. And when their name is in there, they pay attention. So, before you write a letter to the editor, again, you want to check the guidelines. You don't want to waste your time. They're usually extremely brief. You have to be very concise and to the point. But again, the structure of these letters should be identify the bill, explain why it's important to you personally or for your business or your community, and then call on them by their name to support the position. Another trick to get a paper to encourage publishing your letter is to tie it to an article that the paper recently published. So let's say there's an article about solar power and installation at a local institution that they covered, kind of a ribbon cutting thing, a soft story. Well, that's a good thing you can mention and then pivot. We need more of that. Here's a way to do it. And believe it or not, that works. They like to encourage people to be a part of their news cycle. I think the next level of action that you can take as a citizen lobbyist is to testify. You can email your testimony and send it to the committee when a bill is being heard. You can also come to the State House if it's at all possible and read a portion of that or read from your testimony. Generally speaking, your email testimony is going to be really brief, 1 to 2 pages maximum. In most state legislatures, you could email the testimony to the committee clerk and just ask them to distribute the testimony. If you're unsure about that, we can help you find the right email address and so forth. Again, I think in testimony, what legislators want to hear from is why you've taken the time to do this. Why is this so important that you've written a letter or you've testimony or you've spent a couple of hours of your day coming to the state capitol and talking to them. The more specific, the more unique to your experience, the better. Say, for example, you're a solar homeowner. You could talk about, you can testify literally about how important this has been to you and your family. And you can talk about the money you've saved, the jobs that are generated by your particular installation, who the installer was, All those kind of like concrete specifics really make a bigger impression than repeating, the talking points that we or others might give you. Oral testimony is really brief. Sometimes they'll allow longer speech, but usually it's 2, 3, 4 minutes. That's not much time. Generally speaking, if you're comfortable, it's probably best practice not to just read your testimony. That will have it in front of them. And sometimes they'll get lost if they're simply looking down as you're reading. If you read off of it and speak from your written notes, it's generally more compelling. And again, depending on the rules of that particular committee, it's sometimes good if you can bring enough copies of your testimony to just pass out. That really shows that you really care about this and you're thinking about it. So with that, I want to just turn it over to Autumn to talk about the particulars of what we can lobby for to move solar forward in West Virginia. And then be glad to talk about any questions and answers towards the end.
All right, thank you, Glenn. Yeah, if you have questions about any of those lobbying tactics and recommendations that Glenn has walked us through, please do just type them into that Q&A bar at the bottom of the screen. And Glenn, I'm actually going to start sharing my screen now. I think you and I are working from different versions of the slideshow, and I want to make sure that I'm working from my version. So
I'll stop the share now. There you go.
And I will start sharing my screen. Just one moment, please, while we do this. Okay. Can everyone see my screen now, Glenn?
I can.
Okay, great. So for the remainder of this presentation, I want to dive into the details of the policy advocacy campaign that we're focusing on here in West Virginia. And West Virginians for Energy Freedom and Solar United Neighbors are working together with our coalition partners and members to advocate for the legalization of power purchase agreements. And most of you have probably heard me talk about this. Hopefully all of you have heard me talk about this by now, but for the purposes of inclusivity, I just want to ensure we're all on the same page. And starting with what is a power purchase agreement, because this is sort of a in the weeds topic. And the short answer is that this is a type of financing that is used for renewable energy projects like solar. So currently in West Virginia, you can own a solar array or you can lease a solar array, but you cannot engage in a power purchase agreement to access energy from a solar array. And in a power purchase agreement, a third-party developer can own and operate and maintain the solar array or other energy facility on your property, and the property owner purchases the electric output from that facility at a predetermined rate for a predetermined period of time. So anyone, depending on the law in question, like a commercial business, a farm, an entity such as a government or a school or a church, hospital, or a homeowner, a private property owner, can engage in this type of financing arrangement with a developer to access solar. And there are some very real benefits to this type of solar financing for customers. The first being that you don't have to put up the upfront capital that you would need to own your own solar array. With a power purchase agreement, there's generally like zero to no upfront cost. You're paying as you go for the energy that the array is providing for you on your own property. And in most cases, the reason this is an attractive option for property owners is that you're able to save money on your energy costs from day one. You're paying a lower rate than you would be to your utility provider. The other appealing thing about this is that it's a long-term contract, typically 10 to 20 years. And so you as a property owner know exactly what you're going to be paying for electricity for the length of that contract. That really helps businesses and institutions stabilize their budgets. And it's also a way to hedge against utility rate increases. Our electricity rates in West Virginia have increased very much in the past decade, and we anticipate those rates will continue to rise. So this is a way to lock in long-term energy rates for 10 to 20 years. There's often an option for the property owner to purchase the equipment at its fair market value at the end of the PPA term. So it's especially attractive for tax-exempt institutions. So schools, governments, churches, hospitals, nonprofits, these institutions don't pay income taxes, and so they're not eligible for the federal solar investment tax credit. That tax credit is a 26% tax credit off the total project cost in year 2020. That tax credit is set to expire for residential projects in 2022, and it steps down to a permanent 10% for commercial projects. So 2020, the tax credit is at 26%. It steps down to 22% next year, and in 2022, it expires altogether for homeowners and is at a permanent 10% for commercial projects. So it's a really time-sensitive issue for tax-exempt institutions to be able to access this tax credit in the next year or two. And the way PPAs make that possible is because a third-party developer, a private company, can access that tax credit and pass through the value to that property owner in the form of lowered energy costs. So this really adds up to savings and affordable access to renewable on-site energy. There's also a lot of benefits that expanding access to solar through these third-party contracts can bring to our state. Third-party PPAs are a powerful financing mechanism that really allow more businesses and people and institutions to go solar. Most of the solar growth recently has happened in states that allow these types of contracts. And our surrounding states, almost all of them do offer some form of PPAs. Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Ohio all allow for this policy. And they have many more solar jobs than we do, and many more megawatts of deployed solar than we do here in West Virginia. Solar is a very quickly growing industry. Solar PV installer is the fastest growing occupation in the country. And there are, going on 1 million workers employed in renewable energy. It's just a booming industry of the 21st century that we want to make sure is here in West Virginia, and that those jobs and that economic development is coming to our state. It's also really important to attract corporations to locate and invest here to be able to offer access to renewable energy. And again, we hear about corporations passing over West Virginia because we're not giving them that access. So this is one way to make the state more attractive for a more diversified portfolio of employers. And there's a lot more to be said about how this policy will benefit our state. We've commissioned a report that came out a couple of weeks ago, and it's really, the facts speak for themselves. It's a great report. There are some lovely charts and graphs, and it really demonstrates the potential for economic growth and impact through this policy. So I encourage everyone to check that out. It's available at energyfreedomwv.org, and you can download that, share it with your friends and family, and learn more about why this policy would benefit our state. We do have bills pending introduction in the House and Senate this legislative session. And the bill that we are advocating for would legalize PPAs specifically for on-site energy generation facilities. So it is a narrowly crafted bill, purposefully so, in order to make it appealing and fair to all the parties involved. There is a bill currently being drafted in the Senate, and actually just within the last couple of hours, I got word that that bill will be coming up from drafting tomorrow, and it will have a number. It's Senate Bill 611. So we'll be able to see that tomorrow, and you'll be able to read that. Senator Trump, who is the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, is the lead sponsor on that bill. So we're really excited about that. We're also, working on getting a bill drafted in the House pending sponsorship there. So all that said, that's some background about the campaign and why it's important and why we care about it. So we hope that you're all interested enough in this topic to take some action and get involved, and really up the ante and put some pressure on our lawmakers to ensure that something happened this session. So one way to do that is to participate in E-Day. That is the West Virginia Environmental Council's annual environmental lobbying day at the legislature. And I'll talk a little bit more about those details here in a minute. But for purposes of right now, the main thing you need to know is that E-Day is this coming Tuesday, the 28th. And you, as Glen recommended, it is best practice to try and schedule a meeting ahead of time with your legislator. So if you're planning on attending E-Day and you want to meet with your lawmakers, give their offices a call, ask to get on their schedule, or for any day that it's convenient for you and them. If you can't come to Charleston on E-Day or some other day, then I would encourage you to call your legislators' offices at the Capitol. You'll probably have to leave a message, but that's okay. You can let them know who you are, where you're from, and that you support this legislation. And as Glen emphasized, any sort of personal story you have to tell about how this legislation would help you, if you're a business owner, if you're affiliated with an organization or an institution that could benefit from this this bill, that's really important for them to know and to hear from you about your personal story. And if, email is always okay as well. That pyramid of impact has email pretty far down the bottom. These folks get a lot of emails, but I would never discourage you from reaching out to them that way. And again, make it personal. So in terms of the targets that we're asking people to focus on right now, we've been in discussions with the House Judiciary Chair, Delegate John Schott, who is considering sponsoring this bill in the House. So he's considering it. He hasn't done it yet. So it would be great if folks would reach out to Chairman Schott and let him know that you want him to sponsor this bill. And the leaders of our legislature have really been hearing from us and our allies, and they know about the bill and they're aware of this work, but they need to keep hearing from us, and they need to keep hearing why it's important for them to really put some support behind this bill and to champion it in their chamber. So I encourage you to reach out to the House Speaker, Roger Hanshaw, the House Energy Committee Chair, Bill Anderson, and the Senate President, Mitch Carmichael, with that ask for support. And we will have a recording of this webinar available that will include all of the contact details and links to follow up with these folks. So other ways you can help, it's always a great idea to contact your local representatives, and those are links to the Senate and House of Delegates rosters. You can find out who represents you in your district if you don't know. Their contact information is available on the West Virginia Legislature website, and just reach out to us if you need help contacting them or connecting with your local reps. Glenn already talked about letters to the editor. Super great way to draw not just attention of the media, but the public and your legislators to this issue, because they're definitely reading the papers and watching for their names to appear in them. Other ways you can help locally is to ask your city council or your county commission to adopt a resolution of support. We've had Bluefield and Morgantown adopting resolutions, and Charleston City Council is currently doing so. And Huntington is another city that we're working on as well. We can provide a template resolution. It's really simple, and that's a great way to demonstrate that local governments support this initiative. And again, that PPA economic impact report, please share it far and wide. Let everyone know that this policy would benefit our state. And if you are a business owner or a member of an organization or an institution or a government, local government, or county government, and you would like to formally join the West Virginians for Energy Freedom Coalition, we have over 40 coalition member organizations and institutions currently, and we're always welcoming more. So check out the website, check out the coalition, ask your employer or your organization to join. They can reach out to us and we can get them set up formally as a coalition member. You can also follow us on social media, Facebook and Twitter, keep up with the campaign that way. And again, last but definitely not least, I hope you all will be able to attend this year's E-Day at the Capitol. That's this coming Tuesday at 9. There will be a rally at noon in the Rotunda area. And there will be, meeting with legislators throughout the day. There will be speakers, lots of organizations tabling. I will be there, so come see me. And the West Virginia Environmental Council is the main host of that day. We have buttons that will give everyone who comes. So if you want a limited edition PPA button, come to E-Day and get one from me. So, okay, so that brings us to the end of our presentation. I am going to stop my screen share now so I can see what kind of questions have come in. I see there's a couple of questions here. So let's find out. Okay. The question is, will non-property owners be able to purchase power from a solar installation that is not installed on their property as part of a PPA agreement? That is a great question. And in the legislation that we have drafted, that is not an option. This would just be for on-site installations. So unfortunately, what you're referring to would be what's known as a virtual PPA or a type of community solar, which is a really excellent and important policy that gives even broader and more equitable access to renewable energy for folks who don't own property or can't go solar on their own properties. That is something we will really want to see happen here in West Virginia in the near future. But this is a first step that we feel is more politically viable in the short term and will put us on a track to that sort of expansion down the road. And let's see, is there a list of representatives that are currently sponsoring these bills? So currently, Judiciary Chairman Trump in the Senate is our lead sponsor. And the next step after that bill comes up from drafting is to invite co-sponsors to sign on to it. So over the next week or so, we'll be concentrating on getting a broad, strong range of co-sponsor senators to sign on to sponsor that bill. And in the House, we're focusing on Judiciary Chair Schott as the lead sponsor, but asking your local delegates to consider sponsorship is always a great thing to do. And there are, strategic folks that are important to have their support. Okay. Let's see, the next question I see is, can landlords partake in PPAs? So yes, if you're a property owner and you're a landlord, you can engage, well, if this law passes, you could then engage with a developer to install a solar array on the property that you're renting. That's perfectly okay. Okay, next question. Are power companies and co-ops resisting PPAs and other solar progress? If so, how aggressively? So yeah, in West Virginia, almost all of our residents are served by two monopoly utility companies, First Energy and AEP. And those utilities are very powerful special interests in our state. They hold a lot of sway, and they are opposed to any sort of power production that they don't control and profit from. So that does include any sort of distributed renewable generation of the type that PPAs is part of. So yeah, the electric utilities are definitely our main opponents, and they are a powerful opponent. So it is really important for our legislators to hear from folks about how this would benefit our state and our communities and our business environment, in order to counteract the opposition from the utilities. Let's see. And I see one more question here. Society is aging, graying. How would you sell a 12 to 15 year ROI to a person expecting to own their home for only 9 to 10 years? When you sell, does the PPA go with the home? Okay, so that's a good question. And that's something I hear pretty often from folks in West Virginia when it comes to solar, because we are seeing, if you're owning a solar system on your home, it's generally about a 10-year payoff period in this state. And so if you're older, or if you're not planning to stay in your home for that long, that does impact your decision on to whether or not it makes sense for you to make that investment. Ownership of solar is generally a good investment in so much as it increases the value of your home. So if you do sell your home in the near future, you should still see a value add from that investment. With a PPA, that is different, because the PPA does not necessarily stay with the house. And as the homeowner, if you moved before the contract was up, you may be required to pay off the remainder of that contract. So residential PPAs are a very specific type of PPA, and there are pros and cons to that type of contract for a homeowner. So it's this sort of thing that, just like any other investment, you need to consider the details carefully and decide whether or not it's a good fit for your situation. Okay, any other questions?
Autumn, if there's not a question, I don't know that you mentioned it about the report. People would be interested.
Yeah, I did, but I'll mention it again. There's an economic impact report about PPAs available on the West Virginians for Energy Freedom website, and it really dives into some details about how this will benefit us as a state.
What I really meant is, what's the conclusion of the report, the actual number?
Oh, so the report sort of uses the Virginia's pilot program as an example of the opportunity that's available. Just even with a very limited pilot program, this state could conservatively expect to create at least 400 jobs and 18 megawatts of solar. That's sort of the ratio that the report uses to compare possibilities in West Virginia to possibilities through the similar pilot program in Virginia. And if we're able to pass broader legislation that goes beyond just a small pilot program, we can expect much more job growth and many more megawatts of solar than the pilot program would provide.
Yeah, and that's the kind of local impact that legislators would like to see. I mean, they may have questions about the report and who sponsored methodology and all that, but that's the kind of information they really want to see. You know, how is this going to benefit? Where are the jobs? So we have an answer.
Right. Right. So the report is something that you can take with you, and we will have one-pagers and fact sheets available on eDay if you are coming to eDay to lobby. then we'll have some very simple like materials that you can take and share and use as starting points for your conversations with legislators. And I do see one more question has come in, asking, is the PPA agreement language going to be regulated, or would it just be between an installer and a property owner? Effectively, this is a private contract between a developer and a property owner. And so there are like best practices and recommended contract language that is made available from organizations like SEIA, the Solar Energy Industries Association. There are like um, sample PPA contracts for different property classes available for developers and potential customers to refer to ensure that consumers are protected. And in our role, Solar United Neighbors, our role as a consumer advocate would absolutely come into play here. Should these contracts become available in West Virginia, we would be there to ensure that people are making good choices and that the types of contracts that are being offered are fair and legal. And here's another question. What types of information would help counter the electric utilities arguments? Like what would resonate with legislators? I think the economic development messaging, job creation, and attracting business and retaining people in West Virginia are really the messages that we have focused on. I know our legislators are really interested in, creating a stronger economy in this state and retaining our young people and attracting businesses and corporations and economic diversification. So again, the report goes into that in detail. And also, legislators hearing anecdotally from specific business owners, or a school superintendent or a principal or a teacher or a hospital executive or a county commissioner or a mayor or city manager. These stories from real people about how this policy would help them, would help their business or help their work or their community thrive, really make a difference. So if you're able to meet in person with your legislator and put a face to these facts and a story to go along with the numbers, having that personal narrative is really important.
I might just add one thing is that it depends on the legislator, but anytime you could also make a point that people in West Virginia should have the choice about their energy projects and their energy future. Why shouldn't individuals be able to enter into contracts that they want to enter into? It's a good rhetorical question. So it may not speak to every legislator, but that's what's really that's an important aspect of this. Is the utilities don't want people to have that choice. That's why they may oppose or are opposing the bill. And no one's forcing anyone to enter into a PPA agreement. But this bill will allow them to have a choice. And it's a little hard to argue about having more choices.
Yeah, thank you for that, Glenn. That's a really good point. And West Virginians for Energy Freedom, the name says it all, having the freedom to choose where your energy comes from and to be able to enter into this type of contract if you choose to do so as a private institution or business or citizen is important. And it's the free market at work, and it gives people options. And so that does resonate with a certain sector of our legislature. And I see another question. In our opinion, is lingering loyalty to coal and fossil fuels the biggest reason that West Virginia is currently not very alternative energy positive? I think our legacy as an energy producing state and as a coal state is still very strong. And what we like to emphasize to lawmakers and to everyone is that, this isn't necessarily an either or choice. We want to make more choices and options available to people, and to ensure that West Virginia continues to thrive as an energy producing state. But in the 21st century, our energy system is changing rapidly and drastically, and we're not living in the same world that we were 50 or even 20 or even 10 years ago. And so we're going to have to adapt and make changes and encourage new types of energy development in West Virginia. And this is one small way we can do that. All right. Well, folks, it's 3:50, which I think is like a pretty great time to wrap up an hour-long webinar and give you all a few minutes of your afternoon back. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us and for your interest and support in this work. And thank you for the great questions. This was a really good discussion we had. So if you have follow-up questions, please refer to our contact information in the webinar recording. You can always reach out to me directly, autumn@solarunitedneighbors.org. Happy to talk more, and I'll certainly hope to see you all on Tuesday at the Capitol. And thank you to Glen for participating and sharing your expertise in this field.
Yeah, thanks everybody for taking the time to do this. I can't tell you how proportionate impact you can have by taking action on that pyramid. I hope to see as many of you as possible on Tuesday. And any help you need, please reach out to us. We'll be glad to help you do it. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for your support for solar. Bye.